Why is America trying to bar Cuban doctors from going to the Caribbean, a place that needs resources, a place that would welcome the expertise that Cuban doctors provide? And in a time when we have monkeypox, we're coming from COVID, you have influenza, you have cholera, new outbreaks of measles, why would we be trying to stop a nation from accessing medical professionals? Cuba is communist, America is democratic. Cuba is basically what Ukraine is to Russia right now. Cuba is to America. Putin doesn't want Ukraine joining NATO because, those nations in NATO are considered not the best friends of Russia. So if Ukraine, so closely bordered with Russia, is in NATO, then they could plant missiles there and have a very straight line and an easy strike to Russia. So that compromises potentially Russia's independence through military accessibility. And Cuba is a communist nation in close proximity to the USA, and Cuba also has nuclear weapons. Way before I was born, after the World War II, there was the Cold War, a secret arms race between America and Russia, the Soviet Union and America. Cuba was supported by the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and all those men that we used to hear about going through school. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Castro was threatening to send a nuclear bomb to the USA, and that was no friendly thing, because after World War II, when people realized the damage that a nuclear bomb could cause, America was very alarmed at that, At the time of the height of the missile crisis, I believe John F. Kennedy was president of the United States. And at one time, one of the conspiracies, other than Oswald, there was a conspiracy saying that Cuba actually recruited Oswald to assassinate President Kennedy. There have been many conspiracies about that. So Cuba and America have not had friendly relationships for a long time. And America feels that by, other nations within its proximity, within the Atlantic Ocean or Caribbean Sea, which is close to America, if they also have good relationships with Cuba, that is not a good thing in the eyes of America. Because though the world likes Cuban doctors and they're renowned for their expertise, because, for example, Cuba has the most doctors per capita more than any place in the world. And I guess America's standpoint in this, they feel that many of the Cuban doctors were spies and could infiltrate government secrets, because Cuba was a top place in espionage, In the Cold War, espionage was the main thing. That's why even today, when you see certain hostage release situations going on, they're releasing American spies, they're trading for Russian spies, some Black Panthers from the United States. A lot of them, when America was rushing after the Black Panthers to put them in jail and considered them a terrorist group, basically in America, many of the Black Panthers went and got asylum in Cuba. And there is no embargo to be able to be taken from Cuba to go stand trial in the United States. So America and Cuba has had beef for a long time. Jamaica took 137 Cuban doctors in 2020, and there was already 296 Cuban doctors working in Jamdong, right? And then, Italy had Cuban doctors. Brazil had over 1,000 Cuban doctors during the pandemic. Cuban doctors have been deployed to Haiti for cholera. They've been, many of them was in Togo, also in West Africa during the time helping out the people and them for COVID. Many Cuban doctors have been deployed to Congo and places in West Africa to tackle the Ebola situation. So, look, man, them doctors and them is tops. They're always going through dangerous situations. Ebola is a thing where if it catch you, it can kill you in a matter of 3 days, right? You get an outbreak in that, and it's a messy thing in your country. Right now you have over 30,000 Cuban doctors deployed throughout the world. They're called the White Coat Army. While everyone else was suffering through COVID, Cuba had, their COVID rates was a tenth of the global population. So they were one of the lowest COVID rates during the time when people didn't know what to do. They were trying AstraZeneca. They were trying so many different brands and formulas. I know Uganda had the COVID-X. These men and women from Cuba, these doctors were deployed throughout the world to fight during the pandemic. You know, Cuba is deploying nurses and doctors. America deploys militias and military equipment throughout the world that ends up being harmful to even Americans sometimes when the equipment gets stolen and then used against American soldiers. Blackwater is a militia group from America who was employed in Iraq to protect certain dignitaries and ended up doing grave war crimes. And some of those people who did the war crimes in Iraq and kill a lot of innocent people, they were given pardons in America and not subject to be tried in the ICC, the International Criminal Court. This time around, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has announced restrictions on visas for government officials in Cuba and anyone else globally that the U.S. deems to be complicit with Cuba's foreign medical programs. The State Department said the restrictions would extend to current and former officials as well as immediate family of such persons. Yeah, that's bullyism. To be fair, in his opinion, it says here, Rubio called the Cuban medical program a form of forced labor, and the government has warned that Caribbean nations participating in these programs could face visa restrictions. Input something that makes the situation better. Why don't you try to fix the situation than restricting medical aid to human beings? You know, like some of the leaders point out, Cuban doctors have helped out, you know, after hurricanes, you know, various medical situations. They've been very useful. Yes, Cuba does get paid sometimes for their doctors, but that's what they outsource, like I said. U.S. gets paid by outsourcing militias and outsourcing weapons. Cuba right now in the Caribbean and around the world is getting paid by outsourcing its army of what they call their army of white coats to areas of need to battle disease, starvation, and disasters. So why would you try to restrict that instead of trying to help that? And if you're my friend, you're going to try to help that. So, you know, USA and the Caribbean nations, which is predominantly black, seems to still be on a master-slave relationship. Master-slave relationship usually is the situation of a country that has money towards a country that doesn't have money. When looking at this article here from the Associated Press, Marco Rubio also visited Jamaica, the same Cuban doctor circumstance. Jamaican Prime Minister, it says, Andrew Holness, said his nation had benefited greatly from the program that the Trump administration claims violates international labor standards and amounts to human trafficking in some instances. So, you know, the Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew is pushing back against the measure also in coalition with a lot of the Caribbean nations. But history repeated itself here, and Caribbean people must understand and know that. In the 1970s, there was also an embargo by the U.S. against Jamaica, courtesy of President at the time of USA, Ronald Reagan. At that time, Michael Manley, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, was elected. And it was the time in Jamaica when the Rasta Revolution was successfully pushing back against bans on Rasta, pushing back against, bans on speech about Marxism, and coined many phrases from reggae music and Rasta saying, power to the people and more better must come. Because at that time in the 1970s, the embargo against Jamaica from America was stopping food aid to Jamaica. And the people, Michael Manley, told the people, we must go back to farming. And a lot of Jamaicans at that time plant their peas, plant their corn, and dig their yam. And that's one of the ways, renovate and innovate, that you can terraform your country, your nation, to take care of itself so that such embargoes are not affecting you deeply. So the Caribbean and other nations, the African nations, to avoid these kind of embargoes, need to get their stuff together and build wealth, because this is another danger of poverty. It puts you at the mercy of some people who will treat you like a slave and try to control who your friends are, try to control who you talk to. And I don't know how one can call themselves an independent nation when another nation disrespects and could speak to you like that. When you look in the same breath, you can see that the political scene is very, insensitive to citizens, because this political feud is something that is affecting citizens, because there's boys and girls in the Caribbean who have visas and who have scholarships to go to schools, universities, what have we, scholarships in America. This measure proposed by the USA will greatly affect that. It shows you there that in the 1970s, they're willing to say that they're going to starve a nation for dealing with the medical doctors. And who is to say that America is going to upkeep a fair portion of the bargain? Let's say, for example, they say ban the Cuban doctors, and the Caribbean bans the Cuban doctors and doesn't deal with them anymore. So is America going to give free medical visas for people in the Caribbean to travel unmolested to America in order to seek critical health? Because if they don't restrict your visa, you still have an application process, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get a visa to go to America. So what does the Caribbean have to benefit by banning the Cuban visas, and you're not going to give them access to come to your country and get access to first world medical equipment? Well, the Cuban doctors, according to many people around the globe for decades, have been offering and giving first world medical assistance to people with their expertise and with their knowledge. So this is another situation where America is dangling and saying, this is the land of milk and honey. We have beryl, we have diamond, gold, topaz, jasper, and all of the fine stones. And you need to choose these things instead of your health. So likewise, the Caribbean nations must turn their nations into a land of milk and honey and gold and diamond and beryl, so that citizens don't have to necessarily live like that. So that is the challenge of the so-called independent nations, to terraform your societies to make it palatable for citizens to stay there, still benefit, and live in dignity. And looking at this circumstance of the Cuban doctor being used as a bulwark against the Caribbean nations, this looks like legislative racism. And that's because in the same breath, they're offering visas to Afrikaners, white South Africans, to come to America and inherit lands that was worked on by black African slaves, that was worked on by native and belonged to Native American Indians. This is a very rough situation. And like I said, they've never been friends, right? America and Cuba. And for example, in the Caribbean, the island of Grenada, where I man come from, America invaded in 1982. I think the prime minister at that time was Maurice Bishop. And many Cubans died at the Maurice Bishop airport trying to defend the country of Grenada and push back the invasion. They weren't successful, of course. Grenada was the smallest nation ever to go to war with America, and they did not fare well. And they managed to stomp out the communist regime and get back Grenada on the path of democracy, though many people still miss Maurice Bishop. Yeah, a lot of people like Gary too in Grenada, but that's a topic for another day. But Maurice Bishop is considered a hero by many Grenadians. And again, there was America defending its area and waters from any communist threat, the way Russia right now is trying to do with Ukraine against the other peoples. They don't want no democratic country that close to them in proximity where they could launch a serious weapons attack. So what do you think about this situation where, the Caribbean and these nations is under manners? America is telling you who you could be friends with, and the visa is dangled like a carrot in the sky, like a dollar in the sky, saying if you want to reach for this, you better do what we say and be friends who we are friends with. And I don't know, like I said, how that could be an independent nation. But yeah, that's the story. And we have to get it together in the islands. You know, big up the Motley from Barbados. Rightly, she spoke up against that. You know, and many other of the leaders spoke up against it too. So it's not like they're staying quiet, you know. But really and truly, what can they do? Because Trump is elected in America right now and they have the powers. But I think it's shameful that you don't help the situation of medical need. Instead, you put pressure and you put an embargo on people, you know, because they're requesting and trying to take medical help, medical assistance. So that is the situation. I just wanted to drop that to explain the situation and have a discussion on it. And is the Caribbean really independent? Even though some of them remove the Queen as the, you know, representative and abolish the monarchy and everything like that, but still, because of the money situation and the opportunity situation, someone can talk to you how they want and tell you and your officials that they can't travel, and you're basically limited over there just because the nation is having deals with someone else. And it's not even a deal to say terrorism is being sponsored or anything like that. You know, America is a nation that supported the apartheid regime in South Africa during that time. And no one is saying, oh, we're not going to speak to America because you support an apartheid nation, right? No one is saying that, because that's the power of money. So the Caribbean, innovate, renovate, you know, free the mind from mental slavery. Anyways, Mylandvibes reporting from Africa. One love, one black people, one peace, one world. Easy.